So I wanted to talk about how there's talks of the writer who did the 1990s series, and he's like, X-Men 97 is a continuation because everyone, during the COVID pandemic lockdown, everybody was on Disney Plus. Almost everybody. Even people I knew who were like, oh, Disney Plus isn't for me. Well, they posted on Instagram that they got Disney Plus because how locked down they were. So when X-Men 90s show was on Disney Plus, everybody was watching it and talking about positively, not ranting, not negative, but positively saying, this is an X-Men series. This is the X-Men series that they love. This is the X-Men. There is so much wrong with how people are abusing the word woke. Like, people are complaining, oh, well, there's not much diverse culture in the comic books or superhero stories or any animated shows. Like, oh, no, there's no representation of disabled, challenged, or mentally challenged people. No, there is. They're called the X-Men. And X-Men was a great nod to how people with disabilities, mentally and physically, were neglected in the world that we live even today. I mean, there is so much negativity with technology that people who have disabilities get abused, neglected, bullied, cyberbullied harshly. And that's what X-Men gleamed over. That's what it loomed over, that idea of what person with disabilities who are represented as mutants, mutant kind, because they have these abilities or they have these, what is looked at as a disability. There is so much talk of the X-Men 97 coming out that now the writer / co-creator of the 90s Spider-Man, which I loved growing up as a kid. I loved watching that on reruns on Disney XD, or I think it was also called Toon Disney. Man, I loved watching it. And Batman the animated series was also on that too. They had reruns of that show too. Man, I loved watching those as a kid. But anyway, aside from that, there's these talks of wanting to have a remake of the Spider-Man. And my first thought is, no, you can't. It's not because I think it's so good you shouldn't reboot it. I think we're already getting that. If you look at the set photos and look at the designs of Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man TV show that is coming out this year. Later this year, if you look at that, that's basically the 90s version. The texture, the layered nostalgia of the designs of the world that Spider-Man is living in. That's a clear hearkening back to the 90s, the 1990s version of Spider-Man. So we are already getting that. And what's also cool, and I hope, and I wish that What If would look into it. I hoped that season 3 that we would get a What If where It would be that, and then there'd be a spin-off, a huge spin-off of the Spider-Man series. Because if you look at the set photos, the images, it's a clear harkening back to the talk that Peter walked in Captain America Civil War, when Peter walked in and he turned in and he saw Aunt May and Tony Stark talking about his submission to the Tony Stark Research Association. I forget what he said. And Tony Stark is like, hey, come on, I know you're Spider-Man. And he shows video and he's like, look at that, look at you, wow. And Buzz, that's incredible. And then he grabs, I think it's a broom, and he opens up the, an opening to the basement, and all of a sudden the Spider-Man suit that Peter made falls out, and he's like, oh wow, look at that, wow. That meeting is a similar what if scenario in Spider-Man, Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man series. That sit down that you see with Aunt May and Norman Osborn, that's the what if scenario. Instead of what I just said about the reharkening to the Tony Stark and Aunt May meeting, and Peter walks in, no, there's a what if scenario to Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, and it is excuse me, when Peter walks in, and there's set photos, I'll post them, and it is Peter walking in the apartment and seeing Aunt May and Norman Osborn talking. And he's recruiting Peter to become a scientist. And it's an actual entrepreneur enterprise, maybe like how Tony Stark is a genius. Norman Osborn and Oscorp, he has a facility for people like Peter. So he enlists Peter. He's like, hey, I want you to work with me. So yeah, it's definitely something to think about, because the nostalgia of the designs. And I'll post the images either on here or on the link, because I don't want to get scratched at copyright. It is the same thing of Spider-Man. I definitely can see how the guy who was writer and co-creator of Spider-Man 1990s animated series, I can see him wanting that, but he can't, because we're already getting that in the Spider-Man Friendly Neighborhood series, or Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man series. We're already getting that. So yeah, it's really an interesting storytelling, but it's definitely a what if switch, if you think about it, to the Peter walking into the Aunt May and Tony Stark, whereas no, he's walking into the same meeting that you saw in Captain America Civil War, except he's walking into the Spider-Man and recruitment into Norman Osborn, instead of Tony Stark recruiting him into the facility of Civil War. recruiting in the fight of Civil War. So yeah, I definitely can see how people can be confused and want that Spider-Man, but we're not going to get it.